Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, I got a couple more movies from Tubi for you. One of them is kind of famous from 1970. The other one is an obscurity that I found really interesting. Been sitting at the man cave desk, just wandering through Tubi's menus, and I found these two things while I am recovering from the spicy. Health update, doing really well. Feeling quite good. I'm taking the antivirals, doing all of that kind of stuff. A few more days, I'll be fine. I've just got to get through that, isolate, because I'd rather isolate than put on a mask and go out. I think it's better for the people around me. I would hate to give this bug to somebody else, which is one of the reasons why middle-aged Geek Girl and I are isolating in the house and why she's isolating separate from me. I'll go with the obscurity first, just because I'm building up to a climax. It's a 1950 American movie made in a weird movie format called Ants Go Color, which was AGFA's equivalent of Technicolor. It was very, very limited Technicolor kind of process. And one of the things they didn't know is that the film stock deteriorated a lot faster than Technicolor film stock did. Strange thing is that it actually has 3 directors, and all of them are actors who appear in the movie. It's based on one of the Maigret novels by Georges Simenon, and there's a thing called The Man on the Eiffel Tower. It's got a cool cast. You got Charles Lawton playing Jules Maigret, the police detective, who has been played by any number of other people. Jean Gabon, most famously. Rowan Atkinson even did it. A whole bunch of other people, and Gerard Depardieu very recently. So a lot of actors have played Maigret, but Charles Lawton does a pretty interesting version of it, which feels a lot like the one Gerard Depardieu did a couple of years ago. We have Francis Tone playing a man called Johann Ruddick, who's the bad guy of the piece. And Francis Tone was an actor who was big in Hollywood in the 30s and 40s. In the 50s, his career kind of diminished. Apart from anything else, Tom Neal, the guy who was in that movie Detour, the film noir classic, beat him up so badly he had to get a lot of plastic surgery on his face. And the reason Tom Neal beat up Francis Tone, Tom Neal was having an affair with Barbara Payton, who was the wife of Francis Tone at the time. And he beat him up. Basically, not only did he cuck him, he beat the shit out of him as well. So that's Francis Tone, but this is before that happened. And he's great in the movie. We've got Burgess Meredith, playing a French myopic knife sharpener called Joseph Hertin, who's the main suspect for the murder case. There's also a few other actors in there. Robert Hutton, very much a second-tier leading man, playing a rich guy who wants to kill off his mother so he can get the money, divorce his wife and marry his mistress. Now, as far as the direction is concerned, here's where it gets interesting. The director of note, the director named in the movie, is Burgess Meredith, and he directed a chunk of the movie and did a good job of it, and the direction was done adeptly. The other thing is, Charles Lawton directed part of it, particularly the scenes that contained Charles Lawton. He helped out because there was a whole bunch of production problems. It turned out to be a very difficult shoot. And the third person to direct it is Francis Tone, who also directed some of the scenes. He was one of the movie's producers as well. So 3 different actors directed this one movie. The other interesting part of it is that the director of photography, the cinematographer, was Stanley Cortez, who'd done things like The Magnificent Ambersons for Orson Welles back in the early 1940s. And a couple of years later, after he made this film, became the director of photography on the one full movie that Charles Lawton directed, a thing called Night of the Hunter with Robert Mitchum. And the famous film French director Jean Renoir saw this film and said that it's magnificent. He loves the way it shoots Paris. A lot of this movie was shot on location in Paris in 1949. The story is very much a standard Maigret story. Hertin, the itinerant knife sharpener who's very broke, gets accused of killing this wealthy woman and is put in prison. But Maigret doesn't think he did it. So he actually arranges for Hertin to escape and get away so he can be followed and they can possibly find the real killer. The real killer is actually Ruddick, who does it because the rich guy played by Robert Hutton paid him to kill his mother so he could inherit all the money, divorce his wife, marry his mistress, live happily ever after. Ruddick is a manic-depressive sociopath. He is a serious, deep nutcase. And Ruddick has repeated fantasies about ending his own life by jumping off the top of the Eiffel Tower. And Ruddick, being a manic depressive, meets Maigret and teases him. He basically plays a cat and mouse game with Maigret on trying to find out who the real murderer is and trying to find the evidence that will stop Hertin from going to the guillotine. Both of them know he's the real murderer and lead him on a merry chase around Paris. while Maigret tries to get the evidence that will free the innocent man and bring the guilty person to jail. And to do that, they travel all through Paris. There's a whole bunch of really good stunt work in this movie too, a lot of which was actually done by Francis Tone. He did his own stunts. And of course, you get the climax on the Eiffel Tower. And both Francis Tone and Burgess Meredith are climbing around the girders of the Eiffel Tower and doing some very, very dangerous stunt work. There's no wires here. You would have seen wires. They're actually running across the girders and climbing on the girders. And that stunt work is something special. It's genuine, creepy stuff. And both actors actually did it. Now, it doesn't end the way you think it's going to end. He's not going to take a nosedive off the Eiffel Tower. This is a hidden gem of a movie. The prints that they've got on Tubi aren't very good because Ansco color faded and it lost some of the color values over time because it was a pretty shitty medium to film a movie on. But it's a tight little thriller, filmed unusually because 3 different directors who are actors. Plus, it's Paris in 1949, so it has that almost documentary look of seeing how the streets and the alleys and the rooftops and the Eiffel Tower itself were in that time period. The movie has had a restoration. I haven't seen the restored version of it, but this one's a hidden gem. It works as a mystery thriller. It's got a totally manic antagonist with Francis Tone playing Radek, and he's as mad as a cut snake. Charles Laughton's Maigret is very low-key, but he's there, and when he needs to nail a line, he nails a line really well. Burgess Meredith's definitely secondary in this one, and spends most of the movie wearing Coke bottle glasses, which is probably why he got that role in that Twilight Zone episode where he plays a guy who just wants to read, and there's a nuclear blast, and then he breaks his glasses. Could be the reason he got picked for that role. But The Man on the Eiffel Tower, it's on Tubi. It's probably on YouTube. It's pretty much everywhere. Bear with the slightly bad quality of the prints, and you got to have a bloody good time with that movie. The second movie I watched is a banger. It's a real good fun movie. I'd kind of forgotten about it, but it rolls up on my Tubi list, and it's a good print. It's not one of those Tubi movies that is in pan and scan and a very bad print. This is widescreen. It looks good on the screen. It's a 1972 British black comedy directed by Peter Medak, based on Peter Barnes' 1968 stage play. It's called The Ruling Class, and it stars Peter O'Toole with a great supporting cast. Coral Brown, who later on went on to marry Vincent Price. James Villiers, Arthur Lowe as the butler, and Arthur Lowe is fantastic as Tucker the butler. Alastair Sim playing the local bishop. This is a very late role for Alastair Sim. Carolyn Seymour playing Grace, the woman that the 14th Earl of Gurney eventually marries, and a whole bunch of other people, including Harry Andrews, who has a reviewer performance as the previous Earl of Gurney, who basically drops off the twig due to autoerotic asphyxiation. And a great little role by Nigel Green just before he unfortunately died. In the movie, Peter O'Toole plays Jack, the 14th Earl of Gurney, who has just inherited the wealth and privilege of his family estates because his father, Ralph Gurney, the 13th Earl of Gurney, played by Harry Andrews, chokes to death hanging from the rafter wearing a ballet tutu and his underwear. The family has a problem with this because Jack is mentally unwell. He thinks he's Jesus Christ. And the family, particularly his uncle, who's the bishop, thinks this is somewhat uncool. And as Christ, Jack Gurney's kind of nice. He's polite, he's fun, he's funny, he's witty, he's silly, he's harmless. And there are worse people in the world to be in the House of Lords than a benign and harmless and mad as a meat axe guy who thinks he's Jesus Christ. But a very kind and gentle Lamb of God kind of Christ. So the uncle, Sir Charles, decides to marry Jack off because they need an heir. He decides to marry Jack off to his mistress, Grace, played by Carolyn Seymour. She's then to have a child, and the Gurney lineage continues. Problem is, Grace falls in love with Jack, which cheeses off Sir Charles because he wants to give his mistress. But she actually falls in love with him because he's a gentle and harmless soul, and he's Peter O'Toole, so, you know, he looks a bit cool. But Sir Charles's wife, Claire, played by Coral Brown, really amusingly, brings in a psychiatrist called Dr. Herder with whom she's having an affair to cure Jack. And in order to cure Jack, they bring in Mikhail, another mental patient played by Nigel Green. who believes he's an electric messiah. He's an electric Jesus Christ.
Who else has electricity streaming from his eyeballs and from his fingers? I'm the high voltage messiah.
And Mikhail cures Jack. But the cure is worse than the disease. I'm going to go further into the second and third acts of the film, because that's where things get really dark as far as this satire of English class and privilege is concerned. England's stratified society is well worth satirizing. It's freaking absurd, it's dangerous, it's impeded the country for so long, and there are people who are incredibly nasty running things. Peter O'Toole's great in this movie. He does play it theatrically large, but that's okay, because it is based on a play, and it is a larger-than-life satire. Carolyn Seymour is great playing Grace as well. She runs through the arc of that character beautifully. William Mervyn playing Sir Charles is very good. Arthur Lowe plays Tucker, who's the butler of the previous Earl, and who inherits 30,000 quid. And after that, he keeps his job as the butler. But he just doesn't give a shit. He's an unashamed socialist. He gives everybody in the household shit. He drinks the booze. He makes fun of them. And that rolls into the third act in a way I'm not going to tell you. But Arthur Lowe from Dad's Army is terrific as Tucker. He's over the top in the best possible way. The anarchic servant is something that's been in plays at least as far back as Shakespeare. And Tucker's a really nice addition to that pantheon. The movie's replete with all sorts of things like bursting into old music hall songs, for instance. That happens in the movie a bit. It's mad, and it's mad in the best possible way. It's over the top. It's shot beautifully on some very posh locations, though the interiors were done on a studio set. And Peter O'Toole gets to mark the changes in Jack Gurney in a really interesting way, going from the peaceful messiah to something very darker later in the film. And supporting players like Alastair Sim playing the bishop is hilariously funny. And the satire in this movie is particularly savage. Even though the movie is funny as hell, the satirical aspects of it are particularly savage. And the point the filmmakers are making, and the original writer of the play, Peter Barnes, is making is, it doesn't matter how mad you are. If you're a member of the aristocracy, in some way, you're going to get away with it. You can be outrageously, incredibly monstrous, and you will get away with things. Prince Andrew being, of course, the most contemporary example. The ruling class is just such fun. It's had a Criterion Edition release, and I'm going to have to look into that in the future because I think it deserved it. It's one of those movies that some people will say, oh, that couldn't be made now. And you could argue that point, I think, kind of successfully. Wealth and Privilege has got much better over the decades at protecting itself from consequences and repercussions. And that, of course, leads to our current dystopian situation on so many fronts in the contemporary world. Now, this movie was a passion project for Peter O'Toole. He got the rights from Peter Barnes, the writer of the original play. He wanted to work with the other Peter Medak, and basically said, I want to work with this mad Hungarian. You've got 24 hours to cut a deal. And the studio financed the film because Peter O'Toole agreed to appear in it for nothing, but he wanted more money for another film he was making at the time, an adaptation of Man of La Mancha. And that movie turned out to be an enormous flop, so O'Toole got his payday one way or the other. And the movie people remember from that period now is The Ruling Class, and not the poor version of Man of La Mancha that was made with Sophia Loren playing Dulcinea and not being able to sing, even though it was a musical. But the reasons I love this movie are manifold. The comedy aspects are great. The breaking into song at odd moments is great. The fact that it's a savage satire that doesn't back away from its premise. It doesn't soften the blow of the satire. It doubles down when it needs to. And the satirical aspects of it are pretty bloody obvious all the way through. I mean, who isn't going to piss off really? Who needs to be pissed off? It's going to piss off Christians because he thinks he's Jesus. It's going to piss off the privileged because it's making fun of wealth and privilege and aristocracies and things like that. It even makes fun of psychiatry in some ways. And of course, it has that quality that the best satire and the really best comedy has, in that it is unerringly punching upwards. It's punching towards privilege, not down from it. Wonderful film. Should be seen again. The fact that it's on this cheap-ass free platform for people to enjoy, mostly because it's a movie that wasn't made in the 21st century, and all of the big streaming platforms lean heavily on post-millennial content. Legacy streaming platforms like Tubi are important for that reason. They keep available movies like The Man in the Eiffel Tower and The Ruling Class, where otherwise you'd have to scrounge around and maybe pay Amazon a premium to get them, to get a physical copy of things, or even just to get a digital copy that you pay for. So I was incredibly pleased to find The Ruling Class and to revisit it and find out it was as savage a satire and as funny a satire as I remembered it being from previous viewings. And discovering The Man on the Eiffel Tower, I'm on a bit of a roll at the moment of enjoying adaptations of Georges Simenon's novels, particularly Maigret novels, in cinema and to a certain extent in TV. So there's my recommendations for this time around. 2 good movies from the past, one better known than the other, but both of them outliers in a lot of ways, and both of them incredibly entertaining. I'm going to keep digging through Tubi, I think, in the future. Not all of the content on the channel is going to be from Tubi, of course, but where I find groovy stuff on Tubi, I'll mention it on the channel, and I'll give it a decent review because I'm enjoying the process of doing this, and I'm enjoying the digging for hidden gems part of it as well. So that's what I got for you this time around. Thank you very, very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, give it a thumbs up. You can also support the channel by donating through YouTube if you want to, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got Science Fiction Saturday, and I just received in the mail the movies I'm doing for that. One of which I've kind of mentioned on the channel a bit before, but there's a new release of it I wanted to look at. And the other one is a movie that blends 2 genres, one of which is science fiction, in an interesting way. I remember not being particularly impressed by it when I first saw it back in the day, but I'm going to do a re-evaluation of that film. And hopefully I'll like it a lot more this time around. So until all of that stuff happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Dig into some old movies. You never know what you're going to find. And I'll catch you next time.